research with the right goals through a mutuality framework is sponsored by the Science and Technology Section's Government Information Committee. My name is Dan Broadbent, and I am a co-chair on the committee, along with Andrea Pritt, who is the other co-chair. Special thanks to Stephanie Bennett, a committee member, for managing the mechanics of Zoom to make this event happen. Just to make you aware, this event is being recorded and will be made available on the STS YouTube channel at a later date. Andrea will put the link to that channel in the chat. Additionally, a link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants when it is available. Also, to let you know, captions have been enabled, so if that is helpful for you, you can make captions visible by clicking on the Show Captions icon at the bottom of your Zoom interface. During the presentation, you may enter questions at any time. We will address the questions at the end of the presentation and during the presentation when it makes sense to do so. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce our presenters, Rich Matsuda and Dr. Noenoe Wong-Wilson. Let me give a little bit of information about them before I'll turn the time over to them. Rich Matsuda is the astronomy representative on the new Maunakea Stewardship and Oversight Authority and the first Hawaii-born director of the W.M. Keck Observatory, one of the most scientifically impactful optical-infrared ground-based telescopes in the world, located on the summit of Maunakea. An electrical engineer, he started his career at Keck Observatory, helping with the construction of the Keck II telescope. Dr. Noenoe Wong-Wilson is an educator, Native Hawaiian cultural practitioner, and Native rights activist from Hilo. She was arrested along with other kupuna protecting Maunakea Awakea in 2019. Wong-Wilson is executive director of Lalakea Foundation, president of the Hawaiian Civic Club of Hilo, and co-author of Aina Aloha Economic Futures Initiative. She's a respected elder and Hawaiian cultural practitioner who also serves on the Maunakea Stewardship and Oversight Authority. Thank you, Rich and Noenoe. The time is now yours.
Okay, thank you for inviting us to come talk with you all today. So one thing I'll just say off the top is that I refer to Noenoe as anti-Noenoe. It's a way we show respect, and oftentimes people, refer to respected folks as auntie or uncle. So we're actually not blood related, but I call her Auntie Noenoe, so not to confuse anyone. What we'd like to do is start our presentation off with a video to provide you the context. We thought that would be the quickest way to show you the situation at kind of the height of the tension and conflict around Maunakea and the desire to build a new telescope called the TMT. And the video will speak for itself. And then after that, we'll talk about the roles that we played at that time and then up to today. And another thing that we wanted to say is that while this talk is about Mauna Kea and that may be thousands of miles away from where you're sitting today, that it's really addressing things like conflict, contrasting worldviews, including contrasting ways that humans see their relationship to land and nature, and then how systems of government make decisions and give power to some voices and sometimes leaves other voices out, and the effects of that. And so while the situation we're depicting and talking about may be very far away from you, we'd like you to try and tie it to situations that you see closer to home. Also, it's a talk about transformation, healing, and hope. And we hope that you tie that part in too. And Auntie Noenoe, before I start the video, if you have any opening words you'd like to say.
Aloha, everybody. I thank you, Rich, for that introduction. And I just want to say aloha to everyone from Hilo, Hawaii on the slopes of Mauna Kea. I hope that you are here because you are interested in learning more about how this one particular issue is being addressed here in Hawaii. And as Rich says, how you can maybe use some of the lessons that we're learning and have learned, and our hopes for the future in guiding yourself in your own work, in your own communities. And I think we should get started. So mahalo.
Okay, so here, this is our title slide, but let me jump right into the video.
There are other places astronomy can exist. There's no place else for us.
We have nothing against the science or against a telescope. It could be anything that you're building on top of the mountain.
Our religion is very environmentally connected. You need to know your environment really well. Those are our akua, or our gods.
Our gods are living, touching elemental forms that are the land, that are the mist, the rains. Kahopoakani, waihuakani, kapikukapu o waiyau. Then you have the lili noise, the le'ohus and all the mist forms, and the kilihunes, the kilinahes, that really are prevalent and embrace this land.
Just because we don't have a large cathedral up there or an actual building that says that this place is sacred doesn't mean that it's less sacred. We need to leave things just be. I can't see anybody building anything on Mount Fuji, so why is it happening constantly on our islands?
The TMT was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Every single telescope that came up, they told us that was the last one. There's 13 up there now. They never kept one promise.
Since July 15th, Native Hawaiian protesters have formed something of a community of resistance on Maunakea to stop construction of the 30-meter telescope, which everyone just calls the TMT, from being built on the summit of this dormant, sacred volcano.
We knew that construction trucks were coming. And that's when we went from 30 to possibly 3,000 in a parking lot, in a lava field, the only access up to Maunakea that the equipment can take. So we've been here for 17 days now.
Please don't think that you can stay up past 10 and make big noise. There are keiki and kupuna everywhere that we all need to hear moi. What if they come in the middle of the night? We're getting kind of relaxed here, aren't we? They could come at any time. They might not, and they probably won't, but we are here to protect the Mauna. This is not our pa'ina and not our camping trip.
So what is the 30-meter telescope, and why Maunakea?
Maunakea is the best place in the Northern Hemisphere, if not the world, for studying the universe, and there's no doubt about that. This is a 30-meter telescope. The size of its mirror is 10 times the size of the Hubble Space Telescope. It is, designed to look for the conditions of life around over 2,000 planets around stars like our sun in the vicinity. So answering a fundamental question of where did we come from? Are we alone?
Just to get this out of the way, no one actually knows what's going to happen with the TMT project. In the meantime, Hawaiian celebrities are adding their voice to the movement.
We are not going anywhere.
And more or less, the loudest voices in this, those positions haven't really changed in a decade.
We are determined to be here for as long as it takes.
Well, Maunakea remains our preferred choice to build TMT, and we have followed a process for 10 years in order to get the right to do so. So, that's our hope and expectation we will. We are excited, I guess, or we are thankful that these greater conversations are happening, and we look forward to, maybe Hawaii being a beacon for the world.
Paying your bills on time raises your credit score, right? Wrong. In fact, this is one of the 3 major credit scores.
So, astronomers want to build this telescope to look back in time into the origins of the universe, of where we came from. And, in a way, those are the exact same discussions that protesters are having.
So Papahulilani is the
a house of knowledge for everything up in the sky.
If you're a Hawaiian, I mean, you really end up becoming an educator half the time because we're always having to justify why we're doing what we're doing. And then you also end up becoming a social worker too as well, because we do have generational trauma that we have to work through.
Our Hawaiian history and my Hawaiian culture, it skipped my generation. So I didn't learn the language. I barely knew the history and everything. So coming up here and seeing our mourning protocols and having my kids be a part of that and protecting, you know, our temple, it's overwhelming, but something that I really, really believe that my kids need to be a part of because it's for them, the next generation, yeah.
Maunakea is not just about the 30-meter telescope. It's about a unification of a people over the most sacred.
It's hard to estimate, but academic consensus is that there was about 400,000 native Hawaiians at the time that James Cook arrived in 1778. Within several decades, the majority of those people were wiped out through disease, and many elements of Hawaiian society were also lost. But one of the more interesting things that did survive was the kumalipo, an oral chant over 2,000 lines long that explains the connection between the universe and the earth below, and how Mauna Kea, the tallest point in the world if measured from the base of the ocean, is the meeting point between those two realms. So we spoke with Larry Kimura, oftentimes called the grandfather of Hawaiian language revitalization. He's now giving Hawaiian names to some of the discoveries found in part through Mauna Kea's observatories, and he also has an unpublished translation of the prelude to the kumalipo. This is how the Hawaiian origin chant begins.
O ke au I ka huli vela ka honua. When fundamental space altered through heat, when the cosmos altered turning inside out, lole kalani.
The first line in Larry's translation is a fundamental space altered by heat. So every astronomer out there will recognize that as, well, it sounds a lot like the Big Bang.
Absolute, intense darkness. It is simply darkness, penetrating and fathomless. Very profound information that would have taken very brilliant people years probably to put everything together to make sense to themselves. How this great question about where we come from and how this space here has come to be is a very, I hope it's a common question among all people of the world. It certainly was for our people.
Caught in the middle of this are the international scientists who work for the 13 observatories already on the mountain.
These telescopes remain the most productive set of astronomical telescopes any place in the world, and at the moment they're really not able to work. We are at the moment sort of collateral damage in a dispute that is really much broader than about astronomy and the mountain.
To do our jobs requires sending something like 50 to 75 people up on a daily basis. So to get through that initial crowd requires observatories to communicate an urgent, critical need, the number of cars and people that would go up. We pass that message through law enforcement, which gets passed to protesters.
What we do here ends up in our school kids' textbooks, and that's why a lot of us are here.
Me and Alyssa, we are local people. We were born and raised in Hawaii, and we work for the observatories. And so, you know, we have to contend with being part of the astronomy community, but also being part of our local community. And so it's not fun. Yeah.
This isn't a culture versus science issue.
Not at all.
This isn't Hawaiians versus a telescope. It is addressing all these issues that we have had here in our community for the past,
I mean, decades and decades and decades,
yeah.
like a very,
So
very long
long.
time. It's my personal opinion that a lot of it is kind of misdirected. I wish it wasn't so much stress in the astronomy community, because I do feel like we're doing good work, and I do feel that we're being responsible stewards of Mauna Kea.
even if we agree on a lot of the same things that, you know, more things need to be done for Native Hawaiians, the conclusion that we come to about TMT is completely different.
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties, but I think that video did a good job in a short amount of time of kind of expressing also the intensity of the situation and the nuances. And I thought maybe Auntie Noe and I could now share the kind of the roles we found ourselves in at that time back in 2019. I think this video was shot roughly a couple weeks into the stand on the road. So Auntie Noe, why don't you go first?
Aloha, everybody. So a little about myself. I know I was introduced earlier. I was an educator. I'm retired now from the University of Hawaii system, where I was an assistant professor in Hawaiian studies and Hawaiian history at Hawaii Community College. And during this conflict, which started not just in 2019, but really began decades before, as was mentioned in the video, the community and the Native Hawaiian community has struggled with the ever increasing number of facilities that were eventually built on Maunakea. And over this several decades, Maunakea Summit was managed by the University of Hawaii. So that's something that I think is important for everybody to understand, that our own university, State University, had that responsibility, or kuleana, of promoting astronomy and Maunakea as a location for astronomy facilities. And so the community has, by and large, voiced its concern over the number of astronomy facilities that were built for a while. So this isn't something that just recently came about. But for the most part, I think people try to use the systems that are in place, the processes that are presented to us as community, to be involved in government processes. So whether they're the permitting processes at the university or at the Department of Land and Natural Resources that manage some of the permits that were required, the community would show up for hearings, testify, and there was even a series of contested case hearings. So there was a pretty robust history of concern and extreme concern that many people in our community, and especially on Hawaii Island, expressed over the management of the mountain. So it's, again, this has been pointed out in the video. It's not about the science that's being conducted on the mountain. It's about the management of this very special place and the preservation of certain sites that we think is important, because Maunakea for us, for many of us, is a sacred site. It is, as we learned in the video, it is that place where where the earth reaches the sky, and in our history expressed by not only Kumulipo, but by other of our ancient chants and stories, where creation began, where there's that coupling of Papa and Wakea, the Sky Father and Earth Mother. And from that union comes Maunakea and many of our other elements. And so these are issues that we have contended with for decades. So for myself, I have always been opposed to just unrelentless building on the Mauna, that we felt that there should be a limitation, and no matter what the community said, permits were granted and observatories continued to be built. So when this all came up with TMT, many of us, again, opposed the projects in the processes that were available to us. I think in July of 2019, when this all came to a head and this resistance formed on the road on Maunakea, it was really the last straw. After years and years of hearings, contested case hearings, of strong opposition, and the community feeling like that we were at our end of the rope, there was only one thing left to do, and that would be to physically block the road. So I went up along with a number of community members, and actually that weekend when we started, we had been scheduled to be there for a ceremony. We often do ceremonies. It's part of our cultural practice. And so we do our ceremonies at that intersection of Pu'uhuluhulu and the Maunakea Access Road. Only because it is the most accessible for our larger community, and it's safer for Keiki, our children, and our elders. It's at 6,500 feet. And so only small groups of people would venture higher up onto the mountain. There is a visitor center at 9,000 feet, approximately 9,000 feet. And then as you saw, the summit area is just short of 14,000 feet. In our worldview, that upper part of the mountain is not where humans belong. And that is physiologically evident. If you go up there, you can't stay for any length of time. There's just less oxygen, and we as humans are not conditioned for that high altitude. So people will tend to become ill or disoriented. And so in our worldview, that is a place where the gods reside. And we have never lived at those high elevations. And again, only certain kahuna priests or special people with special skills for a particular purpose would have access to those high elevations. So we were having our regular ceremony at this time, and it coincided with the county and the police coming and closing the road with the attempt for TMT to go up. So short story is, after a few days, a number of us kupuna or elders decided that we would remain on the road, and we would not let the construction trucks pass through. We asked all the rest of the young people to please stand on the side, and we practice what we call kapu aloha, which is peaceful resistance, nonviolent, direct action resistance. We talked to them about it. They were trained in it in those days, about not being violent, about understanding what our purpose was, and to keep ourselves in prayer and in a clean spiritual space, so that we could collectively achieve what we were trying to do, which is to make sure we stop that one project, the one project that was attempting to come up on the mountain. And so the rest is history. 38 of us were arrested, all elders. that day. Thousands of our young people stood and sat silently on the side of the road and watched. There was no violence, as scary as it was to have law enforcement with us, and being under siege for a lengthy period of time, for that day until law enforcement finally left. Um, it changed everything. I think it just created such a firestorm of emotion amongst our Native Hawaiians and our Indigenous allies and non-Indigenous allies here in Hawaii and around the world that it became a movement. So what we thought might be a 1 week or 2 week stand turned into a 9-month occupation of that road. And I remained on the Mauna with a number of our supporters for 9 months. But all during that time, we had conversation, peaceful conversation, with our government leaders, with TMT and astronomy individuals. And as Rich said, that the film we just saw was filmed within the first couple of weeks of that resistance. But eventually we understood and made it very clear that we were not opposed to the projects that were already up on the Mauna. We were very concerned, as they were, over the safety of the facilities and the people who had to work there. And so there was an agreement as to how employees and other people, deliveries of supplies and things would be allowed to pass through. And because we were solely intending to just maintain our stance against the project, the one project. And we didn't want any of the building supplies or the construction equipment to go up there. So I think we came somewhat to, so I don't know if it's peaceful but it's a respectful, maybe, place there so that we could maintain our stance. And that's what happened during that 9 months that we were there. And so since then, and maybe Rich, this is kind of, I'll toss it back to you, about how eventually the government, and particularly Speaker Scott Saiki, came to some agreement about how we might address the impasse. So I'll pass that back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'll just mention that at that time, I was responsible for Keck Observatory operations. And as Auntie Noinoi said, in the beginning, it was pretty chaotic, but eventually things became more routine with, there was a statement made in the video about the difficulty of getting through there, and that eventually the temperature on that went down after a while. But there was still, the road was closed for a very long time. And only certain people could go up, as Noinoi said. And at that time, I think I felt very personally conflicted, because having grown up in a multi-generational family in Hawaii and been living in Waimea, where Keck headquarters is at, I saw many people from our community making a stand there at Hulu. People I knew in the community, fellow parents of children and members of the community that we interact with on a regular basis. So it was a really difficult time for all of us that worked at the observatories to feel sort of caught in this conflict, and things felt very stuck. As Noinoi said, it went on for 9 months. So there was this feeling of impasse in a way. But what happened later was in 2020, of course, the pandemic arose, and with the statements by the project and agreement with the mayor and so forth, that there would be no attempts at construction due to this public health crisis. There was sort of a timeout that occurred, and in 2021, at the beginning of the opening of the Hawaii State Legislature, Speaker Scott Saiki made a statement in his opening speech about how he believed the system of governance on Maunakea needed to change, that it wasn't working anymore. And so he called for the formation of a working group, and called for this working group to come up with a recommendation on a new form of governance for making decisions on how land is used on Maunakea and the conduct of activities on Maunakea. And so he put together this working group, and in the second half of 2021, both Auntie Noe and I were among those on a 15-person, I believe, working group that included 7 members of the Native Hawaiian community, and then folks representing the State Department of Land and Natural Resources, the astronomy, which I was the representative for, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and so forth, other government representatives, as well as legislators, that worked for 6 months during the pandemic to come up with recommendations for a new governance model. And that eventually, in 2022, went to the legislature as a bill. And I think none of us really expected that bill to go through, because it was such a calling for a radical change. But lo and behold, it passed with a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth. But where we are today is, 5 years later from the time that video was shot, state has created a Maunakea Stewardship and Oversight Authority to eventually take full responsibility for management of Maunakea. It's a community-based board with, for the first time, explicitly representing Native Hawaiians with voting authority. And I'll note, of the 11 members on this new authority that have voting power, 8 are Native Hawaiian. And it turns out that Noe is the first vice chair, I'm the second vice chair. In the act, which just got posted in the chat, it talks about the mutual stewardship paradigm upon which this authority will operate, is to protect Maunakea for future generations and manage the lands contained therein for the purpose of fostering a mutual stewardship paradigm in which ecology, the environment, natural resources, cultural practices, education, and science are in balance and synergy, and also based upon Hawaiian values that I think would be better if Auntie Noe expressed those. It also states that astronomy is a policy of the state, meaning that astronomy is a priority to the state, but it also gives the new authority the responsibility to develop a management plan that will find the right balance and make decisions about land use and carrying capacity on Maunakea of human activities, including astronomy. So I'll pass it back to Auntie Noe to fill in the things that she'd like to fill in.
Thank you, mahalo, Rich. So yes, this is unprecedented in Hawaii, and I'm hoping, and I believe that some of our lawmakers are interested in seeing if this kind of model of mutual stewardship might be appropriate for other areas where there's conflict over land use, not necessarily astronomy related, but certainly related to areas that are considered sacred, historic, special by our culture, and then of course in our modern context, our our general population and particularly our visitors really want access to some of these special places. So, if you've worked in government, the words carrying capacity are really kind of estranged. It's really reluctant for government to actually put a number on what the carrying capacity is for any particular area or place. And that is one of the challenges that we've been given for Maunakea Oversight Authority, Stewardship and Oversight Authority. We are now not quite 2 years, over a year, into the development of the authority. We are literally starting a new state agency from scratch, having to hire employees, having to put policies into place, and in the meantime being given a 5-year time frame in order to transfer the management of particularly the summit and the visitor area of Mauna Kea from the University of Hawaii, which has held that responsibility for decades, over to the new authority. And so it is a gargantuan task that our authority, our board members are now really working with, and having to hire outside consultants and expertise in order to do this. So all in all ways, keeping in mind though that we are grounded in some of the cultural foundations that were given to us by elders, by people like Antipua Kanakaole Kanahele, who is one of our very respected cultural elders, and Kumuhula here on Hawaii Island. And it really, those foundations ground us in how we need to collectively approach management. And those are principles that deal with the way that our environment acts and is responsible in its own right, and how we as humans have to respect that that condition of our natural environment, about how we as leaders in this authority have to take our responsibility in making sure that the work we do is for the people and for the good of not just the physical humans that are living, but for our environment. And that refers to that synergy that must be there between our use, our cultural practices, our human uses, and our spiritual foundations on the mountain. So it's just a series of ways for us to ground ourselves as we do our work, which I think is a little different from most state organizations and state agencies. So so that's where we are now really in the beginning process of how we put together the new management plans. And the shift that Rich was talking about when he read that statement is really from the university who had the responsibility in state policy to promote Mauna Kea as a premier location for astronomy, to what we are now responsible for, which is to make sure that Mauna Kea is protected for future generations, and that all of our uses and all of our human intent, which includes science and culture and recreation and education, ecology, environment, are all balanced in a way that Mauna will be there for our generations to come. So that's where we are. And maybe we should spend a little time allowing Rich people to ask questions.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to ask both of us to share maybe a short statement about what we hope for the future and then jump into questions. So I'll go first, and I'll keep it quick. And then we totally enjoy to have questions and conversation around this. So when I think about what has occurred out of this situation, it's really caused astronomy to look at ourselves and our relationships with community in a new way. So for myself, when I look to the future, I hope that the future is one in which, and we'll get there over time gradually, but the future is one in which everyone, not just observatory people, but everyone recognizes and respects the sacredness of Maunakea and respects the people who have a spiritual connection to Maunakea. I also hope for that the local community is truly a part of the observatories, not just in terms of representations at the different levels of the organizations, but also in terms of respectful adoption of Hawaiian values and language and knowledge and customs, and that there's a home in the observatories for that. And that, in turn, the observatories are truly seen as part of the community. And in doing this, we excel at science, and we carry that out in a way that is uniquely of this place, Hawaii. In other words, the Hawaiian knowledge systems open new avenues for scientific inquiry and collaboration that we can't even imagine today. And I hope that in the future, our descendants will look back to today and say that this is when things changed, and we all realized what's possible working together, and scientific pursuit becomes for the whole, for everyone. And that's my hope. Antinoi.
Sure. So my hope is that through this process and with the authority, that we will actually be able to come up with a plan that will inform all of us about how the Mauna is used in a way to make sure that we as humans don't overwhelm the sensitive environmental spaces. One of those things is a limitation on the number of astronomy facilities that remain on Mauna Kea. And so what is that magic number? I'm not sure, but I don't think it's 13. It certainly has to be less than that. And how is it determined which facilities remain? And I would also believe that if Mauna Kea is, from the scientific perspective, the best place for a science like astronomy to be conducted, then only the best science should be conducted up there. And so we do have facilities that are decades old, and I'm certainly not the judge of whether any one particular facility is the most up to date and produces the best scientific knowledge that is possible. But I do know that when we look at the James Webb Telescope and the future of astronomy, which to me is not necessarily land-based, that we don't want to sacrifice those places that we do have, like Mauna Kea, even for temporary we have lots of other sciences that also need to be properly conducted on the Mauna, and those are the other environmental sciences, the ones that will help us become better stewards of our earth. The ones that help us to understand the climate change and that we as humans have on our planet. So all of those things have to be considered when we talk about the future for Mauna Kea. And yeah, so that's my hope.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. We have some questions going in through the chat, and some folks have sent questions to me. So the first question that showed up in the chat, would you say that the conflict started in the 1970s before the first telescope was ever built?
So, so when that first telescope was first proposed to our community here on Hawaii Island, and particularly to our Native Hawaiian community in Hilo, what was proposed was one small telescope. And the kupuna were asked if it would be okay to build that one telescope. And we hear from not so much the people who were alive at that time, but from their children, like Antipua Kanahele that I mentioned, that, even then her mother was not really happy that they were going to put one telescope up there. But you also have to realize that at the same time that the telescope was being proposed, the one small telescope which was being proposed, that community was being faced with relocation of neighborhoods for the expansion of the airport in Hilo so that international flights could arrive. They were installing the sewer plant, the first sewer plant in Hilo, right in the middle of their community. So here's the Hawaiian community being besieged by all of these modern activities that come directly after us becoming a state. Do you remember? Don't forget that we became a state, reluctantly or otherwise, in 1959. So in the 60s, that was a decade of unprecedented growth. Money was being poured into the new state of Hawaii, and all of these new conditions were being established. And so, did people disagree with that? Was there a conflict? Probably not as large a conflict as there is now, because it was only one, and it was only supposed to be there for a period of time. And so only in the last year, really, has the first telescope been completely decommissioned, one of the smallest, and the second one is underway. But this is since 1970, yes.
Great, thank you. The next question from the chat is, does the U.S. National Park Service have a role in this issue? And I believe Rich answered that, so I can say that here for the recording. In this case, it's state land, so the National Park Service is not involved right now. Moving to the next question, is there really a path forward for astronomy in Hawaii? Is the wound too deep to heal?
I can, yeah.
Well, let me just say this, Rich, and then you can comment as well. This conflict on Maunakea was the #1 issue, divisive issue in the state of Hawaii in 2019, 2020, and 2020. And it still remains a divisive issue, although the temperature has kind of come down a bit. #1, because the project has not made any attempt to begin its construction. And we all know that, in fact, that they're dealing with some financial issues. They simply don't have the funds yet to complete the project. And so the question being asked, is the wound too deep? I think we have to really make a difference between what TMT is proposing and the fact that there are astronomy facilities on Maunakea, and just really point out that our opposition since 2019 primarily is against one project. And so we have to be really clear about that.
I was gonna respond with one of the lessons learned for the observatories that already exist on Mauna Kea is the importance of building relationships, mutual understanding, mutual respect, and we have a long way to go, but I think we've made progress that gives me hope. I think before 2019, it would have been kind of out of the realm of possibility that folks would see Auntie Noinoy and myself appearing on a seminar like this. Recently, we've had, so I think, maybe observatories were mainly focused on building relationships with people who were fans of ours, very supportive of astronomy, and not focused enough on understanding different points of view. And so we've really changed focus to build relationships with all folks to learn and understand. And I think, so from the progress we've made with that, and not to convince anyone, but just to be in human relationship with others and to understand. I feel like there is a lot of healing that needs to happen, but we're on the right path. Whether or not, like the question says, is it too deep to heal? I don't think it's too deep to try.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question. Could you say more about the Hawaiian values embedded in the authority?
So FYI, I posted in the chat for people so that they could see. This is actually written in the Act 255, but the three are Mauna, Aloha, Opu Kupuna, and Holomua Oe Kela Kela. But Auntie Noinoy, if you want to talk about what those mean.
Yeah, and Mauna Aloha really is our collective love and respect for the Mauna. And I know that when you talk about, when you talk with astronomers, I hear the same, that they believe that Maunakea is a special place. Now, I cannot speak for others when we talk about how what that love is for place, but I know here in Hawaii, if you live here for any length of time, we have a love for our land. Our land is what feeds us. It's what allows us to thrive and live in these small islands. We can't go across the border for water or supplies or for energy. We have to live within our boundaries, and we have strayed away from that over the decades as we become more Western and more American in our ways of thinking and acting. But Mauna Aloha, I think, is part of that mutual stewardship, that condition that all of us can agree to, and that is our love and respect for the mountain. That has to be a major foundation for all of us as we move forward. Opukupuna is, as it's in the chat, it is about really understanding our responsibility as stewards of this place. It sort of comes from the concept of opuali'i. It's about our chiefs that fed the people. It's not enough just to be born a chief. If you are not a leader who takes care of the people, then you are not respected in that way. And the same for us. We respect our elders. We respect the people who come with the knowledge of the community before us. And that respect is for Mauna Kea, not only as a spiritual place, but for its environment, our cultural foundations, our traditional practices. And if we all come from that place, then we know how to work together and fit in. And then the last one is what we call Holomua Oe Kela Kela. It's about using creativity and innovation to problem solve, to move into the future. So we don't ignore our past. We always stand on our history and our past and our collective belief about what Mauna Kea is for us, but we use our creativity and innovation to look at ways that we can steward this special place together. So those are the three Hawaiian principles that are actually in the state law, which is profound for us.
Thank you. And I know we're right at 4 o'clock, but we do have a few more questions. I don't know if either of you are able to stay on. You can give a little thumbs up.
Sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So another question that came in, how would one start a dialogue with local tribes in order to create a mutuality framework before a situation warrants a major action?
I have a perspective on that, which is really starting with one-on-one relationships. I think one of the reasons why the Maunakea working group was effective in coming up with a report that we had consensus around was around the one-on-one relationships. Eventually, which turned into the group dynamic being one of trust and respect. So that would be my suggestion to the person who asked the question is who in that community can you meet and talk to, and from those initial conversations build outwards. But I think that first step's really important. In a formal sort of governmental setting, it's really hard to open up that quickly and develop trust. To me, it starts one-on-one.
Wonderful. Our next question is, how do the lessons from the conflict, or how could they be applied to the larger astronomy community and make it truly better for all?
I'll just mention that, oh, go ahead, Antinoinoi, go for it.
I just want to say, I have attended a couple of astronomy events. And what I came away with after attending the AAS event last year was there's a new generation of astronomers that are aligned with this kind of thinking already, and I'm not saying that the old guys, none of the old guys have come from that same foundation, because you certainly have people like Rich and others that I have met that have a much better understanding about why you need to work with community. This is something that maybe in the astronomy field they never had to contend with before. But when I heard the young astronomers at these conferences come to the table and talk about their understanding of community and a different perspective about themselves as scientists and about their science and how it should work with community, I felt enlightened. I felt really good about the future, that, with the new generation, that these things are possible. And sometimes the answer is no. That's sort of the underwriting thing. When is enough enough? When is no no? And then, because when you have no, then you can also have other opportunities for yes. But we need to get away from this old paradigm that somebody, some third party, some government official makes a decision, and it's based on money, and it's based on a perspective of what's more important, which sometimes becomes Western science as opposed to environment or cultural belief systems. And that has to change. Yeah.
That was a perfect segue. In 2021, the U.S. National Astronomy Community came up with a decadal report called Astro 2020, and there are recommendations in there about creating a community astronomy model that operates much more in the framework of what Antinoinoi was saying. And there's actual progress being made to organize around these principles. I'll just mention one of them that echoes what Antinoinoi said, which is aim to do good for all. And I don't have the direct passage here, but I made a note that says, add human value, make difficult choices that don't always optimize science alone, which is what Antinoino was talking about. And I just came back from American Astronomical Society meeting held in Madison, Wisconsin a couple weeks ago that had a workshop where we talked about what does it mean to create a community astronomy model. So to the person who asked, please contact me if you want to be a part of that in building it out. We really do want to change the way astronomy is done in these ways. Thanks.
That's wonderful. And there's been great comments in the chat, folks, thanking you both for the presentation and our important discussion. This is the last question that I've received, and I think it's a good segue and kind of forward thinking. So it came in during your session. From your perspectives, what are the challenges ahead, and how can folks support your efforts from places outside of Hawaii, or if the person is a non-astronomer or a not in the astronomy community?
I'll let you answer that, Rich.
So how, when you make, so this is not really specific, and hopefully we can think of something specific, but when you make a big change like this, I think there's a lot of skepticism because it's really hard to let go of the systems that have, provided for us and been a stable foundation for us. But like I was saying, back in 2019, we felt in the observatory world really stuck. And so we got behind the idea of change for the better and change for the long-term future. And so we need people who support the idea of taking the risk to make change. And certainly there's risk involved because when you change stuff, you can't rely on the things that have gotten you here. But the realization and the courage to take the step to what you really need to go into the future. We just need people who are supportive and help us with basically convincing the skeptics that it's worth making a change. That's all I can think of right now.
Well, mahalo, Rich. Mahalo, Noenoi. Thank you very much for your kindness and sharing your experiences with us. Thank you as well to the audience for participating. As we said at the beginning, we will send a link to the video or the recording when it's available to all the registrants. So thank you again.
Thanks, Dan, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mahalo. Aloha.